the stream is transferred over. If you are in the YouTube chat, please let me know that you can see and hear us. This is issue 566. Consensus layer call 91, first order of business. We're going to do these twice a week for a while to catch up with the all core devs call and then supersede them in numbering. Sorry, it's a bad joke. Today we'll look at some merge stuff, some MEV boost stuff, which is related to the merge, and then general updates and discussion points from there, if there are any. On the merge, there are a few things, and then we can leave room for anything else that you want to talk about. First, Perry, can you let us know what happened to, or happened with, and how it is going of MSF9?
Hey everyone, so we had mainnet Shadow Fork 9 much earlier today. I'm not actually sure why the estimation was so off this time, but the TTD estimation we did last week was hit pretty much like a day and a half earlier, and the estimation I ran yesterday was still hit like 8 hours or 8 or 9 hours earlier than expected. So it caught us a little bit by surprise, but either ways. We are finalizing on the network, but just barely, and I'll go through the list of reasons why. So the first issue we noticed was there was a problem with the lighthouse nodes where they would ever so slightly fall out of sync and they wouldn't start syncing again until the next epoch where they catch up. The Lighthouse team already had an open PR, and I think it was almost ready to merge. So Paul was able to give me like a fixed image for that really quickly, and that was patched. The Bezu nodes, I think 4 out of 5 of them hit an invalid block. I think it's still related to their world state issue. Nethermind is offline on purpose though. They ran into this issue on Robston, and I think Marek will talk about it a bit later, but they ran into this issue on Robston and they thought they had fixed it, but they ran into the issue again on mainnet Shadow Fork 8, but after like 12 days of running without a problem. So I think they wanted to track it down, so they purposefully ran like 25% of the networks on Nethermind on like really weird configurations. So each of the node was configured differently with, I think, different cache rules, so that they trigger the issue on at least some of them, and I think they did. So hopefully that helps them figure out the problem. Ericon had not synced up to head, or some of the Ericon nodes had not synced up to head yet. I'm not particularly sure why it's taking so long to sync. So from next time, I'm just going to be using a snapshot that we have created. So we should be able to make sure that they're synced before the fork hits. But they are like relatively close, so I can give you an update on that later. And the Nimbus nodes was an issue on my config. I've been merging like a lot of changes we had temporarily for different shadow forks. And on one of them, I had a check for if it's a Nethermind node, it wouldn't run the JSON RPC snooper because Nimbus node, we wouldn't run the JSON RPC snooper because Nimbus was using WebSockets and we didn't need it. But in the meantime, I had shifted to HTTP, but the check was still there. So basically all the Nimbus nodes were sending their request into the void. So spinning up the RPC snooper fixed that. And I think most, if not all the nodes are fine again. Yeah, I think that's a list of all the issues that we had. All in all, I think like 30% of the network is offline, but I guess if the Nethermind nodes come back online, then a much higher percentage would be back online.
Got it. Is there anything in particular that we learned from this, either in how to do things or new issues surfacing?
I think on my side, it helps validate all the configs changes that I've been merging, and that I'd be using a different method to sync Ericon in the future. And those are the two from my side, but I'd let the client teams talk about the rest.
Okay. I can talk about.
Mark, we can barely hear you. Can you get close to the mic or try a different mic?
Right now better.
Yeah.
So we had a weird rare issue with tree exception, and I noticed it before on Robston. I think it was the same issue. And we fixed a few things, and we never noticed this issue again for a long time. And yesterday, after I think 12 days, we noticed it on mainnet Shadow Fork 8. And we start preparing very different configuration to get to know what's going on and maybe to trigger it a bit faster. And it seems like reducing pruning cache, triggering the issue faster, and maybe we have potential fix also, but we are exploring it a bit more. So yeah.
Got it. Is this related to merge code paths, or is it another mine issue?
I think it is related to pruning code, but it could be triggered also on not merge, pre-merge, but it is very, very hard to trigger this issue pre-merge, and it is easier for shadow forks especially, and that is the problem, right? So I think it is very hard to notice this issue pre-merge.
I see. Lucas?
So it's a bit related to how, because we process on new payload if we can, a block to validate it, and it's related to that we had quite random distribution of new payloads, like going back X blocks, like having payload that is older in terms of block number quite a lot, or having multiple payloads at the same level on the shadow fork. So yeah, it's a bit more random here and more like frantic. So that helps trigger it easier.
I see. Have y'all been looking at the antithesis results? Because they also, their platform I think often gets some of these like weirder scenarios coming forward. Did y'all see anything there? No? Okay. Any other client team specific reflections on mainnet Shadow Fork 9?
So one more thing I shared, probably the reason, and we see that we are receiving payloads in order, and we received one payload out of the order, and that probably triggered the issue in Nethermind nodes. But I think generally on healthy network we shouldn't have this. I mean, it is possible, of course, but when we are running all the nodes, it shouldn't happen. So maybe it is also connected to Bezu issue that trigger this new payload out of the order.
Yeah, I think dropping that in a gist so that we can see if it's related to one specific client type would be good. And are you seeing that on all of your different CL client pairs, or is that from a particular?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess it seems network related rather than. Okay. Yeah, if you can put that in a gist with some notes, let's dig into it.
Another thing to mention is we haven't really had network-wide non-finality tests on mainnet Shadow Fork yet, but for a period of time, I think 60 epochs, the network wasn't finalizing until like some config changes were made, for example, fixing the Nimbus nodes. And once that was done, all the Nimbus nodes recovered as expected and the network finalized. And it seems like we didn't have any hiccups there. So that's good news.
Got it. Good to know. I'm looking at the screen and want to ask lots of questions, but I don't think we should live debug this. Okay. Any other Shadow Fork discussion points? And if not, what's the next plan on Shadow Fork?
I was thinking, considering we'd want to do Curly as the next testnet, we should have a Curly Shadow Fork next. And that should also make it a lot easier to have a bigger network if we want, or spin it up more on more short notice. We wouldn't have to wait like a week for the
Right.
Curly Shadow Fork, for example.
Because of sync times?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. And I suppose we should double down on our TTD estimation that we used here to understand. Was it... This TTD was selected like a week ago, so we were off by like half a day? And half a day in the context of 7 days, not half a day in the context of a day?
Actually, no. So the one we selected a week ago was off by a day and a half. And the one we selected yesterday was off by about half a day.
In the earlier direction on both?
Exactly.
Okay.
So at least looking at Etherscan, it does seem like hash rate has gone up, but not by such an insane amount, at least.
Okay. Let's investigate that as well. So Perry, on Gorley Shadow Fork, that would be this coming week, and that would be midweek?
Yeah, I'd say Wednesday, just to keep it easy for everyone.
Configs out Monday, nodes up around the same time, and Wednesday target, something like that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Well, if you have particular builds or config changes or anything like that, please let Perry know.
And I also wanted to ask people if they still want mainnet Shadow Fork 8 for debugging, or if that can be torn down.
Could we wait a bit? I don't know, 1 or 2 days, because we updated nodes just to see something with this 3 exception. Of course, it is a problem. We can switch to number 9.
No, a couple days is fine. I think it's more useful having it around for you to debug.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on prior or future Shadow Forks? Okay, Perry, you have a discussion of naming you'd like to bring up as we approach the Gorley merge.
Yes, I think people are eventually going to start asking about documentation, etc., for how we want to treat the future merged Curly Prata network. I don't know, early on there was some consensus on just calling it Curly, but that still implies there needs to be like a breaking change, or if every client wants to support Curly and Prata flags, and that's what we use in documentation, and then eventually there's a breaking change where Prata is removed. I'm not sure of the approach, or even if we want to go down that route, but I wanted to bring it up for discussion.
And this is because on the consensus layer, we have particular flags, like if you were doing a network configuration -- network Prouder.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And it's just easier to communicate to people if we have like a decision made now, so all the documentation written follows those decisions, versus having to change it midway.
Would it make sense to deprecate the Prater flag, leave it working in clients, but mark it, mark it as deprecated, and introduce the Gordy flag, and then you keep both as like an alias for, I don't know, like the next 6 months or something, and then eventually you just deprecate the Prater flag or remove the Prater flag, but you have like a deprecation announcement when the Gordy merge happens, basically.
Why even deprecate it? I mean, we could just leave it there, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you want to leave it there forever, sure.
And I think the first key question is, are clients all happy to have an alias, which for Teku, I think is really trivial and it's a no-brainer. If that's the case, and it will be in the release that we're saying you need to upgrade to for compatibility anyway, then the instructions use Goerli and clients decide for how long they want to support Prada. I think it's really only an issue if there's a client that doesn't want to add the Goerli alias for some reason. Then obviously the instructions would have to be tailored for that client to keep using Prada. There's no real reason we need to coordinate the removal of Prada. That's just part of the client UI. Not UI, but user UX.
Yeah, for Lighthouse, I think it should be pretty easy for us to add an alias. I'd probably also tend towards leaving Prada there as well, just for people that already have DevOps setups. Like our DevOps setup already calls it Prada everywhere, and figuring out how to change just the network flag name would just be kind of painful and not much gain.
Yeah, same with Prism.
We'll start an agreement too.
Anyone from Nimbus want to chime in?
I'm here, but I didn't hear what was being discussed.
That's all right. It might be easier to communicate to users to use a Goerli alias in consensus layer configs, so maybe -- network Goerli, and just keep Prater there as well.
Right, that's so easy to do. Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect. So documentation will focus on just using the Goerli flag, and the expectations that merge ready releases would have that flag available. Thank you.
The only thing I'd probably add is in the docs, we should note that you don't need to resync if you use Prada. Like, we don't want to cause users a lot of confusion to think they're actually switching beacon nodes. So if there's a note that Goerli is just the new name for Prada and it's an alias, that would be very useful.
Yep, makes sense. We'll make sure to enter that.
Great. Anything else on this one?
Nope, that's the whole topic.
Okay. Tim, will you give us the TLDR on your document on the 1 versus 2 phase merge deployment? I believe most people are pretty familiar with it, so maybe just get the high level.
Yes. Yeah. So high level is what we want to avoid for the merge is the TTD being hit before Bellatrix is live on the beacon chain, because it causes a whole bunch of issues. And there's 3 ways we can achieve this with different pros and cons. The first is we have a single release out for the merge, which combines both Bellatrix and the TTD, like the actual TTD. And because on mainnet we can fairly well estimate difficulty, we can plan it such that like it's quite unlikely that the TTD would be hit before Bellatrix. And the pushback against that on the awkward dust call was that, well, a lot of the security assumptions we make usually revolve around like, what if a state level actor wanted to mess with the process? And with like the declining hash rate on mainnet, there might be a small chance that like this would be possible if you had a massive amount of hash rate. So, you would get like a simpler UX for end users, but like introducing potentially some like security I wouldn't say like a security issue, but like the potential risk of an issue, in very kind of very, I guess, extreme edge cases. So the other approach you can take is, instead of doing that, you do like we've been doing for some of the test nets, where you have a first release go out with like a huge TTD, and then once the Latrix is live, you have a second release which has the actual TTD, and then you know for a fact that that the second release, the TTD for the second release would never hit before Bellatrix, because Bellatrix is already live. And then the third option you can do is what we've also done, like on Robson, is you just do a TTD override. So you know, you same thing. You have the first release with a high TTD. Once Bellatrix is hit, you just have an override. And the kind of trade-off there is like you might be able to coordinate an override quicker than you coordinate a new release for downloading, because you know what the flags are in advance, and you can communicate them to users in advance, and you just tell them plug this value in the flag once you've selected the TTD, rather than waiting on like 10 client releases. The downside is you're like asking users to do some more like command line interactions that they may not have to do if they're just downloading the release. So those are like the three options. I think if we were to take like the dual release kind of approach, I guess, yeah, regardless of which approach we take, it would be good to take the same approach across mainnet and Gordy, such that users know kind of what they're getting, what the flow will be like on mainnet. But if we could decide this today, I think it would be really good, because yeah, then it means we can start like coordinating things for Gordy. Yeah, so I'll pause here.
Dr.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. It doesn't feel like we need on our main path, we need to consider the risk of someone literally increasing hash rate by 50% or something. Like that someone has that capability, and the best thing that they can do is accelerating the merge so that it fits before Bellatrix just gets very unrealistic. It doesn't fit.
So,
and we'd still have weeks to react to that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and
Donkred,
we can't hear you very well, but I think we get the point. I think this has been brought up a number of times, and I also agree. And I'm going to mute you because you have a lot of noise in the background. Yeah, it's not only if such an adversary exists, such an adversary could potentially do other worse things, and if such an adversary exists and wants to do this, they can't do it overnight. They have to do it in a very obvious way once these numbers are released, and so there's also on the order of a week or more to react. But I think that's definitely the strong argument in saying that this doesn't really change the adversary that we're considering here. It maybe gives them one other thing that they could do in this discrete event, but that it's very unlikely they could even do it without us noticing and fixing. Andrew?
Yeah, I think we should go for a single release, because the merge is complicated enough already, and like we as developers, we can deal with it, but to a lot of users, it will be very, very confusing just to realize that you need an EL client, a CL client, you need to ensure communication between the two, and so on. And if on top of that we complicate it by a need for another release and or a flag override, it's like it's an unnecessary complication that will cause a lot of headache. The simpler the better. It's like the merge is already super complicated.
Got it. Thanks, Andrew. Adrian has a thumbs up. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thumbs up for me. I prefer a single release. I think a downside of the dual releases is that it's going to take us more time, because we need to give more notice between each release, which either means that the merge happens later, or it means that we force things to happen earlier that could have happened later whilst the merge happens at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the key in this is that we want to be setting a TTD, which means hitting it before Bellatrix is activated requires a 51% attack. Like if you've got to double the mainnet hash rate, then that's not feasible in our security model by anyone. If you can do that, you're hosed. You know, if we're able to do that, I don't think there's any real question that like we're not introducing new security risks, and we shouldn't be concerned about that. If we're reducing that threshold somewhat, then we can talk about it. But I'd like to see some clarification that we would be reducing that from a 51% attack to something lesser, so a lesser percentage before we worry.
Yeah, I think
so.
Go on.
Oh
no, I
was
going to say
say
the same thing.
Okay, as long as the gap. So basically, you know, if you think of the gap between choosing these values, hitting Bellatrix, and hitting TTD, as long as it's like an equidistant like gap between choosing and announcing the values, then hitting Bellatrix, and then hitting TTD, then you would need to double the hash rate if you started mining like on the second that the announcement is out, to make TTD happen before. And then as you get closer to Bellatrix, that proportion changes, right? If you're like a week away from Bellatrix and like 2 weeks away or 3 weeks away from TTD, we would need to like more than double the hash rate. So I think in practice, if we wanted to go with this like 50% hash rate assumption, what it looks like is like you like announce the releases. 2 weeks later, you have Bellatrix, and 2 weeks after that, you target TTD. And that means that like if you double the hash rate from the time of the announcement, you know, you might hit TTD before. And then every day that passes where that isn't the case, you need an even greater share of hash rate.
Yeah, so it's primarily if you shift the ratio, like if you went 2-1 on that split, then you need to add plus 50%, and so you're changing your assumption a bit, but also not necessarily in a incredibly detrimental way, also because it's extremely observable, but nonetheless. Also, there's always two types of 51% attacks. One is the existing hash rate colludes and 51% attack. Another is a new amount of hash rate shows up. New amount of hash rate showing up is a much more difficult thing from a world resource perspective, but not theoretically impossible. Okay, did any other engineering team want to chime in? Does anybody want to take the counter to this?
I still favor the robust solution, but I don't have anything new that's not already in Tim's document. I think he did a good job of outlining all the options and the pros and cons.
I think we should have just like made Bellatrix a bit differently so that it doesn't need the TTD to be specified at the fork point.
It doesn't.
Already said that.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay, good.
So it's not like it like gets baked into the chain or anything like that. It's a configuration parameter, either being set or not. I guess you could have done Bellatrix in a way that it doesn't need to be talking to an execution layer
yes.
to be pinging, and then you upgrade it. But that's still kind of the same thing. That's still kind of like unknown or infinite TTD, but it's primarily error log thing that maybe changes, which I think is some of the argument here.
Yeah, it just kind of feels weird to me that we have two forks that are somehow connected to each other. And now we're doing like we're specifying two forks at one point. That's
Right.
But it's fine. I'm not going to argue.
Okay. I do believe, based off of here and conversations with engineering teams, that there is a strong desire to do a one-phase approach based off of the assumptions around attacker and the engineering simplicities. So I would suggest that that's what we do with Goerli. Anything else on this point?
This isn't for Gordy, but I think for mainnet, it would be really valuable if within like 24 hours of choosing the TTD and the Bellatrix height, clients are like able to schedule the release. I'm not sure what's the best way to do that. Anyways, we can discuss it offline, but yeah, basically we don't want to like have a week go between like choosing this value and announcing it with client releases. So I think that's the only thing. It's like, it would be neat if clients were like ready to release just before we choose it, and then they plug in those two values, and then within like the next day, there can be a release that we can announce.
Yeah, one of the things to be aware of is that until we have a TTD, whether it's a ridiculously high one or the real one, users can't start updating their config because the execution engine on a number of ELs doesn't start listening, and the config checks don't happen. So if we're making that a tight timeline, it's a challenge for users to update in time.
We're in the process of changing that, so that when you start up Geth, it will already start up the engine API.
That's awesome. I think the config checks will still be an issue because you want them to be in sync, but yeah, definitely useful to change that.
Okay. Let us move on. Other merge-related discussion points, anything that we want to bring up, either to notify this group or ask some questions, anything like that?
I did want to just touch again on what Marius and Adrian were talking about then, about just trying to make sure that all the execution engines will start their auth RPC ports kind of from now, before the merge params have been announced. That allows people to set up their DevOps environments as if the merge has already happened. So yeah, it's very important. So at the moment, EAs that don't open their auth RPC port before the merge params, it means that people can't future-proof their setups. But I think it sounds like people are already moving towards that. Just wanted to raise it as a point.
And Tim, can we make a note just to bring that up on all core devs as well?
Yes.
Although I think we have good execution layer attendance today. Okay, great. Any other merge items?
Do we want to talk about Goerli today, or a status update on Goerli?
Yes, do you have a status update, or does Tim have some ideas on when we can or should be picking numbers?
So the only thing I have that could help is this website from Free. It helps us estimate TTD on Gurley. Gurley is really stable to estimate. I think even if we were to pick one now that's 3 or 4 weeks in the future, we'd still be able to get it down to within a few hours. Yeah, and the website lists like a bunch of options. But that would, I think, depend completely on the client teams and when they want to try and schedule it for, or even if we want to make a decision today.
Tim, based on recent discussions, is that something you want to do today? Or
Yeah,
is that something we're
I'd
doing
just be
Monday?
curious to hear from client teams. Like I know on the last Core Devs last week, a bunch of them were looking into some recent issues, especially on the EL side. And if we can pick it, far in the future, is it valuable to pick it today if it's a month out, or is it better to like pick it closer? I don't have a strong opinion there, but yeah, I guess. Do client teams feel like they're ready to move forward, and if so, when would they want to see the fork happen?
Lucas?
Lucas?
So from Nethermind side, I think generally it's good to have a plan ahead. We can like modify it if something goes terribly wrong. And in terms of like the dates, 4 weeks is reasonable. 3 is a bit stretching it with the issue we uncovered that we want to explore more. Yeah, we would like to have this fixed before early. And that's it.
You said 4 weeks would be reasonable, sorry?
Yes.
Okay. So 4 weeks, that would be like August 10th or so. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, if I'm counting correctly. I guess, and then obviously we'd want Bellatrix to happen before that, as we're all talking about. I think it could actually be interesting to like try and like estimate it 4 weeks out, because that's basically what we'd want to do for mainnet. We can have Bellatrix happen closer, like we don't need this like equidistant gap like we do on mainnet because of the hash rate, but
yeah, a Monday Bellatrix might make sense in this type of network.
Yeah, exactly. So we could do basically target the 10th of August for Gordy, and then target the 8th of August for Bellatrix.
I think I'd still keep like few days more apart, just because worst case, all the signers then bring up their nodes and they've realized they've been offline, and suddenly the average difficulty goes up.
So more of a maybe a Thursday
exactly
prior to that Wednesday.
I'd say like 3-4 days is probably safe.
Well, then you have the weekend, so then you want to buffer the weekend.
Or we do
Thursday,
TTD
Tuesday.
on Thursday and Monday and Thursday, for example.
Right.
So
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you do.
The only concern I have is that if we push out the merge for Gourley, Prada is the main network where validators are testing. So the later that is and the closer that is to mainnet, the less time the community actually has to really prepare and is forced into preparing for this. So I worry that we push it back so that we can get the final details of final bug fixes and a gold-plated release, that we actually shoot ourselves in the foot, because we're giving less time for the community testing in the biggest environment that we have, in the place where most people will be affected.
How long do you think people should have to test?
I don't think there's a clear time, but just to me, it's more let's fork Gourley and Prada earlier rather than later. Even if we know that a couple of clients have got some bugs, as long as the user experience is set, then that preps people really well. Otherwise, we're twiddling our thumbs, and we're not twiddling our thumbs, but we're taking up more time towards the merge than we need, really, and that's being taken out of the community testing budget, basically. And I don't think that's reasonable. Right. We need to get the community on board as soon as possible.
So given that we are July 14th right now, are you making a recommendation on a particular date or week?
I mean, how quickly can we get client releases out, basically.
So in 1 week we'll have the Gorley shadow fork. So I believe we shouldn't do it next week, and that we should do a Gorley shadow fork before. So then, if not the 10th, we're looking at more like the 27th or the 3rd. It sounds like you'd be pro 27th.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think we need to give a reasonable amount of time between announcement and update as well, because again, we've got a lot of people on Prada that will need to actually make changes, and they won't be paying attention too much. So 27th probably works.
Phil, you mentioned the community call tomorrow. Is those that have been on and have been running these calls, is that actually a good place to like get input on this? Casey, I'm muting you.
I think we can get some input for sure. Probably by like the more professional side and like infrastructure provider. Like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of like individual random stakers who show up, but
I also don't suspect. Well, I would suspect that people want more testing time. So that I would estimate that's the response.
I think, yeah, one thing I do agree with Adrian though is having like some amount of gap between like announcing and release that's like at least a week and not like a couple days. So it means like, if we announce it on the 27th, then we would fork on the 3rd basically. But like that requires clients to be ready on the 27th, right? And more or less a couple of days, but I don't think we want like to announce on a Monday and fork on a Thursday, for example. If we're expecting like most stakers to actually have to take time and update their configs there.
Right, and implicit in announcing is we want to have releases out. So it's like deciding today, you wouldn't announce today. You would announce in some amount of lead time before the fork when we had releases.
So I guess, yeah, it seems like either we would announce something on the week of the 27th and fork on the week of the 3rd, or announce something on the week of the 3rd and fork on the week of the 10th. Like I doubt that like client teams, unless client teams could have a release out next week and then we fork on the week of like the 27th, but the EL teams on Awkward last week seemed, I think that was a bit quick.
Right.
So yeah.
I mean,
I'm also questioning if 1 week notice is enough, because we'd ideally also want the community tools to have enough time to update. For example, the Ethereum on ARM guys would have to release their image. That would rely on the CR releases. Tapnode would probably have to make a release, and we'd probably want a few community videos and guides up and running. I'm sure we can already start working on that stuff with like placeholder releases, but just so you guys know, it's probably good to have a higher buffer period than just releases are out, expect everyone to update.
Okay. So in that case, if we think we want even more than a week, I feel like releasing on the week of the 27th and like announcing there, and then maybe doing the fork like Bellatrix on like the Monday, and then and TTD on the Thursday, so like on the 8th and the 11th. So that gives like 10 days before Bellatrix and like 15 days before, or a bit more than 10 days actually before Bellatrix, like more like 11 days before Bellatrix and like 15 days before TTD on Gordy from the releases. Does that seem reasonable to people? So it means client releases should be out like on the 27th or 28th, ideally, so that we can announce this on the 28th or 29th, and then fork on the 8th and the 11th.
Can you contextualize that in terms of a mainnet timeline?
I mean, look, like if we fork, I guess, imagine we fork Gordy on the 11th of August. Everything goes well. Everyone's super happy. It probably won't happen. Like, imagine like, yeah, we see it go well. We want to see it like stable for obviously a couple days to a week. It means on the 18th of August for all core devs, we can probably decide upon like when do we fork mainnet. And imagine that like we have the releases out the week after that. Or like, yeah, so that means that then 2 weeks after that, that's like early September, and then like late September, we would hit TTD. So I think it's as well, like, yeah.
If we have the
possible.
release, if we have the releases out early September, then I don't think we can fork mid to late September.
No, sorry, I meant early September. You get Bellatrix. So it's like we fork on the 11th. On the 18th, we decide on like the final values. So the releases are out like like the week of the 24th or the week of the 22nd of August, and then 2 weeks after that you have Bellatrix, and then 2 weeks after that you have TTD, which gives you like the week of September 19th. And if we wanted to be like slightly more aggressive, like, I guess the thing that would maybe buy us another week in a way is like either we don't fork Gordy on the 11th, we have like a lower gap between Bellatrix and TTD, or if we want to get a couple of days as well, we can also have like an off schedule call, because we're like waiting basically a week between Gordy fork and the next core devs to choose the TTD. If we want to save a couple more days, we could have like an off schedule call, or just move all core devs the next week to like the Tuesday, for example, and then you gain that many more days. But yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, the only risk is if we try to hit TTD on a Tuesday, obviously the CL call happens on a Tuesday, and so it's unlikely that on that day we'd feel comfortable like moving the mainnet, because we may not have seen TTD on Gordy hit, and even if we have, it'll be at best for a couple hours.
I definitely think we're in a position where picking up 2 days or 1 week here and there, if possible, is preferable.
Yeah, I agree. I'm fine moving all core devs earlier that week if it means like we get the merge like a week earlier. Because if you imagine, if you had all core devs on like even the Monday rather than the Thursday, it means for sure client teams can have a release out by then, by the end of that week, and you kind of save like instead of having Bellatrix hit on the week of September 5th, maybe it hits on the week of like the last week of August, and then similarly, instead of hitting TTD on the week of the 12th, the 19th, maybe you hit it on the week of the 12th. So I think we get, and we don't have to decide obviously this today, but I think if we're willing to have the Gordy fork happen in like the week of the 8th, both the Bellatrix and TTD have clients out on the week of the 25th, it does put us in a space where it's like quite realistic to merge in September, assuming again that like the Gordy fork doesn't completely blow up.
Okay. So based off of this conversation, obviously the conversation got anchored again onto that 8-10 week, but there's also more context around potential timelines and how to strategize there. Adrian or anyone else, do you want to still argue for an earlier week?
I mean, I'd still probably prefer just get client releases out next week with the Goalie TTD, but that is probably pushing it. So I think I can live with that. I think it's a no-brainer that we should schedule all core devs for shortly after Goalie goes through and merges, so that we can make that decision and call on mainnet as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So we'll have our statisticians go to the drawing board and select some potential on the TTD and fork epoch for Prouder, or for Gorley and Prouder respectively. And then, Tim, is that something that we should try to get consensus on over the next few days, or is it something to get consensus on 1 week from today?
I'll share some values. I'll share some values like before the next awkward dev. We just need to like tweak a bit after each stage and whatnot. But like, you know, we can confirm them on awkward devs, but there's no reason for people to be blocked on that. Like, I don't know if I'll get them today or tomorrow, but at the latest on Monday, people should expect like a proposal for a TTD. You know, the epoch is like a no-brainer to figure out, obviously. But yeah, the TTD, we just need to change our freeze estimates to do Thursdays instead of Wednesdays, so that shouldn't be rocket science.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
It's good to decide that async if we can, instead of waiting for awkward dev to set a TTD, because otherwise we just take another week before we even start all these processes. So thank you.
So I can put it in like the spec for Shanghai, and I'll open a PR and I'll leave the PR open for like 24 hours. And if somebody wants to object to it, they can there, but then I'll just merge it.
Okay. Thank you. Any other points on this Gorley and merge schedule? Okay. Any other discussion points related to the merge? Okay, thank you. Moving on, MEV boost. Metacris, can you give us a quick update?
Hey everyone. Yeah, sure. Please interrupt me as a couple of points, and I try to keep quick. One notable development is that Prism finished the beacon specs, the builder specs implementation. So it's now Teco and Prism that are completed the integration and it's merged. I think Lighthouse still has a testable branch, but it's not merged. And Nimbus and Lodestar are still in development. Next topic is that MapBoost had a security audit that is now completed. A bunch of minor issues with some recommendations, and one medium issue that is important to put in some specification for relay operators. There's like some edge case. I linked a GitHub issue with the audit PDF. Releasing a new version with all the minor fixes very soon. We've been rolling out updates for the Flashbots relays and builders across Kiln, Robston, and Sepolia. So we're seeing a lot improved performance. Thanks everyone for your latency measurements and reports, in particular Enrico and Terence. It really helps. And let us know if you see any other issues with the performance. The bottleneck is mostly the signature verifications of the registrations, because on the beginning of an epoch, we get 10, 20,000 registrations, and Prism is currently re-signing the registration on every epoch, so it needs to be re-verified. So that should all be done. We got a request from Nimbus to make one of the test nets open to any validator, so registrations and getting the payloads are not bound to actual validators. I think we can accommodate that, easiest on Sepolia. What else? Good to mention.
Sepolia is a permission network, so it would kind of defeat the purpose. It might be better to do that on Robston.
But the point is, it's really only needed for consensus client development, not for actual users.
Okay, makes sense.
Thanks for the idea. So yeah, the relays, they are in a good state. If you see any additional latency issues, we might go to investigate the network causes, because the relays are fast now from our end. There's now an ongoing push on specifying the proposer config file format. I know Enrico, Terence, and Stefan have been working on that, and now there's a push to put it in writing, which is a config file definition which allows proposers to choose relays, fee recipients, and other properties independently. So basically, validator clients with a bunch of validators, where each validator can set custom properties and then a fallback on default properties. Maybe I should link the...
Yeah, so akin to how Graffiti was done. So you can even programmatically change the text file if you want.
Yes, this issue here. And yeah, and lastly, I wanted to give a shout out to the EF security people that have been looking into MevBoost, Builder Utils, and other repositories. In particular, a shout out to Justin Traglia. He is was very good in finding like edge cases around the SSC encodings and some types. And yeah, that really is very much appreciated. It's mostly around the Go Boost Utils repository, which is like just all the types for the builder specs and the SSC encodings and JSON encoding and decoding functions. All right, I think that's it around the MevBoost most important status updates.
Great. I have a quick question. The audit that you did, was that on specification and implementation, or just the implementation?
Mostly on the implementation, but he also looked through the specification. But it was specifically on the implementation.
Got it. Okay. Great.
I think he found an edge case that is not necessarily something to change in the specification, but rather on like nodes for implementers, where validators could, if the relay does not properly verify the signed blinded beacon block corresponding to the real slot and proposer, then there might be a way to get the payload even if you're spoofing the proposer. Like you can read it in the PDF linked to the Medium issue. On our release, this is fixed, but we should put this probably in the builder specs repository in a relay document.
Got it.
I will make a proposal soon.
Okay. Any other questions for Chris?
Yeah, would it be possible to have a relay up in a couple of weeks for one of the shadow forks? We could have something like 10-20% of the network relying on MEV boost and see how it looks on a wider scale.
Yeah, we can do that. For sure. I think we just need to align on a timeline. We just need a little bit of a heads up to sync up some nodes and test this.
Yeah, sounds good. If we have Girly Shadow Fork next week, then I guess we would do Mainnet Shadow Fork the week after. So that would be about 2 weeks in the future.
Okay, yeah, I think we should be able to accommodate that. That is end of July, beginning of August. That sounds great.
Okay, perfect. And in case someone has opinions on how much of the network has to be MEV boost, feel free to reach out to me and then we can make that happen.
Okay. Anything else for Chris? Great. Thank you, Chris. And Alex, I believe brought this up on All Core Devs last week, but there is an issue or a PR up in the builder specs around merge transition delay. Alex, are there any remaining questions or comments you have for this group today?
Yeah, I think mainly we just wanted to talk about implementation. I think some people here on the call wanted to discuss that. As it's spec'd right now, it would essentially be like an epoch-based delay. So the first question is simply like, does everyone think this is a good way to, sort of specify this embargo?
It was me discussing on the PR issue. So the delay was initially thinking. I was thinking that has been a very easy thing to implement, but the way it's been specified, it was adding a little bit of additional complexity more than expected, because actually, if you need to add a delay based on when the first execution payload has been finalized, if you start up a node and the node only has the latest state, you don't know actually when in the past this execution payload has been first finalized. So you cannot count and you cannot bring up with this delay correctly unless you are persisting this information at runtime when it happens, and then you use it later. This was my point, and it's definitely something we can do. We were arguing if makes sense, and then the argument from Alex was actually convincing that makes sense for ODCL clients to implement this delay as well. But I'm thinking if there are other clients thinking about that.
Is the challenge in knowing whether the finalized block is post-merge transition or not? Is that a challenge?
Yeah, actually, because at least we have only the latest finalized state, right? So imagine that you start up the node and you have your latest finalized state with the execution payload already there. So the chance is that you have to go back in time with the canonical chain, finding out the block that was bringing the first execution payload in the past, unless you have stored somewhere when it happened in the past.
This feels like... You're going.
I was gonna say, at least for Lighthouse, so in fork choice we track whether the execution status is enabled or not, and I would assume that most clients are doing it because of optimistic sync. And I don't think you need to actually find when the transition happened. All you need to know is whether or not the finalized block is pre or post transition. I'm just speaking generally as well. I haven't read that spec, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the practicality of this is something of an edge case of somebody who is syncing with presumably a finalized state that's after the merge. And if it's... I would imagine that when you're in the 100 epoch range or something like that, that you can kind of just turn this on. Or if your node is online for 16 epochs, then you also know that you've now reached the condition because you started with a finalized state that had the execution payload in it, and now you've also waited 16 epochs, so you know that at that point you've also hit it. So I think we can probably use some sort of heuristics here for this edge case around sync if somebody's actually starting with a piece of a state that's really close to the merge and there's some uncertainty. But I don't think that we need to bring a ton of complexity in here is my intuition.
And is the question about this the check for optimistic sync, whether or not we're close to the fork?
The question is if you're actually at plus 16 epochs since the first finalized post-merge state.
I'm not understanding. Why would you want to add the 16 epochs?
16 is the suggested number in the builder specs on how long to delay turning on MEV boost.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is okay. So not what it.
Yeah, so for Prism, it's actually fairly easy to do since we can just look up for choice store and see the latest finalized block has a execution payload or not, and then we can plus minus 16 epoch worth of slot from there.
But if your node then restarted, so if you then finalize, so you're 4 epochs into that period, the node restarts, you don't want to add 16 to the finalized checkpoint when you start up again. You've actually got to remember that you're 4 epochs into that period, which there isn't anything in the state that can tell you that, I don't think. Or Proto array.
Oh yeah, I didn't realize that we were waiting like n epochs after the finalization happened. Yeah, that's going to be a little bit more difficult for us as well.
Yeah, I was thinking that if you are at runtime, you can do that. If happens at runtime, we can store something in our key value store just for remembering and persisting for the sake of a restart, and then use it if the node restarts. It was my intention to lower down the complexity, even if at some point you need to hit the store and to persist this information, which I think it was not intended in the first place when writing this spec. This was my intention.
I don't know if I'm just recovering things that have been discussed already, but how attached are we to that extra n epochs past finalization? I would be tempted to argue that if we manage to finalize the chain, then it's time. Then we're kind of out of danger zone in terms of a bunch of weird edge cases with the merge, and that it's okay just to turn MEV on then.
Well, you could also do plus n epochs from point of merge and finalization.
So it has to be at least.
Or is that hard to pull up to?
Having just based on finalization is super easy. N epochs is harder, I think.
From point of merge, not just finalized merge.
Yeah, I think so. Because finding the point of the merge is the tricky thing.
Yeah, we are already postponing. Sorry.
Aren't clients download the block, historical blocks? I mean, like going back beyond the checkpoint that they've got on the startup. Because 16 epochs is like, yeah, it's just 500 of blocks. So you may just pull them from the network if it makes sense. I mean, if it doesn't, if it's used for some other things. And just look at the block, that boundary.
We do backfill, but the complexity is in then saying like, oh no, hold up, don't produce a block until you've backfilled. That's not something that we have, and it's something that I'd be hesitant to put in the flow of block production.
Not do not produce, but just do not use map boosts. I don't know. Probably it's just complicated.
Yeah, I think it's complicated for us. For us, like backfill is like this thing that we kind of put in a thread and shove over to the side because it's very independent. So it'd be nice not to link it all through to everything.
Also, there are historical blocks in the state. Yeah, but I guess for mainnet it can work. So you can just pull the block by hash, the exact block, and just look at this block.
It seems a little bit missing the point to kind of complex solutions, because the whole idea is to make things simpler for ourselves around this.
Yeah, agreed. If this requires increasing complexity, that's bad. So I would err towards simpler. And maybe just Paul's suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I have just one very easy thing is to simply do a delay, not based on the finalization, but just adding a delay on the Bellatrix fork, which is very easier. But then you need to find out the right value that ensure you that you go after the TTD, and though to be sure, then it means that the MEV boost will be activated quite later than expected.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I think that pushes us too far in the other direction.
Yeah,
timing wise.
I think that there will not be like a huge portion of validators who has just recently joined post merge. which means that this parameter and this trick works is like more for those who are online and staying online through the merge. So probably if you're starting a new node from a checkpoint and it has a payload that is finalized, it's okay to use map boost right from the beginning. I mean, like when the node is ready.
Yeah,
Can we
I think it
have
would be
finalized
cleaner if
and
we could.
ask the only relayers not to be on?
What was that? Was whether the relayers were going to be playing ball with
Well,
this?
there aren't that many relayers, and we can just start map boost on our end since we are finalized, and just ask the relayers off chain. Just don't turn on the relay or don't accept anything until 16 epochs after finalization.
And there is a risk of another relay that will just not agree to follow this. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's very minor because anyways, we're analyzing just running this after finalization.
Yeah. And I think if your CL is starting out with a checkpoint, probably your EL will be syncing like for the next few hours or whatever. I don't know. So it will also take time for the node will up and ready for producing blocks. So I would, yeah, my opinion is just, yeah, do it in a simple way. And if checkpoint has it finalized, if checkpoint already has the payload in it, so just start using map boost.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the finalized thing. I think doing it inside the beacon node is good. The beacon node has the finalized state. It's the ultimate controller of whether MEV boost gets used or not. So doing it there makes sense. And doing it based only on the finalized state is something that we know clients always have. It's simple, and we don't need to add edge cases about did you recently sync or not.
I do agree. We're already doing that, and having a finalized execution payload in any case gives you a good hint that the network is healthy.
Okay, so it seems like there's general consensus on simplifying. Likely simplifying so that the consensus layer just those clients will begin acting on MEV boost at finalization. There's an additional thing where maybe it's specified that relays wait in epochs because they don't have the same edge case concerns around like syncing and resyncing and that kind of stuff. Is that a reasonable synopsis, and can we take that to this issue for further discussion? Okay.
Yeah, I can update the PR, and that sounds like everyone's on the same page there.
Got it. Okay. Anything else on this one? Okay, we have 15 minutes. Are there any pressing updates, any pressing research spec or other discussion points for today? Okay. Any non-pressing updates or discussion points? Great. Okay. Thank you. Good meeting. And we will be talking about Goerli configs over the next handful of days and keep the ball rolling. Appreciate it. Talk to you all soon. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.